This happened a few years ago when I was still living at home with my parents. I was in my early 20s at the time, old enough to stay by myself without anyone worrying too much. My parents were going out of town for the weekend to visit relatives, and I had stayed behind because of work. I remember helping them load their bags into the car earlier that afternoon. Before they left, my mom did what she always does, reminding me to lock the doors, not to open them for anyone, and to call if I needed anything. It was routine, nothing unusual. By early evening, the house was completely quiet. Our house isn't very big, but it has 2 floors. The living room and kitchen are downstairs, and the bedrooms are all upstairs, including my parents' room at the end of the hallway. There's no guest room, no spare spaces, just bedrooms and a bathroom up there. That night, I stayed downstairs. I ordered food, watched TV, and scrolled through my phone. Around 10 p.m., my mom called to check in. She asked if I'd eaten and if I remembered to lock the doors. I told her everything was fine. We talked for a few minutes, and then we hung up. I remember setting my phone down on the coffee table and stretching out on the couch. That was when I realized my phone battery was already low. I'd left my charger upstairs in my bedroom. I didn't think twice about it. I walked toward the stairs and had just taken the first few steps when I heard something that made me stop. A phone was ringing upstairs. At first, my brain didn't process it as anything strange. My immediate thought was that maybe one of my parents had forgotten a phone, or that an alarm was going off somewhere. But within a second or two, I realized something wasn't right. I recognized the ringtone. It was my mom's ringtone, the exact one she's used for years, something simple and unmistakable. I stood there on the stairs, completely still, listening. The sound was coming from upstairs. More specifically, from the direction of my parents' bedroom. I remember feeling confused more than scared at first. I honestly thought I must be mistaken. Maybe my phone was ringing again. Maybe it was echoing somehow. I checked the phone in my hand. It was dark. No incoming call. No notification. The ringing continued upstairs, steady and normal, like someone had just placed a call and was waiting for it to be answered. I stood there long enough that the ringing stopped. That's when my phone vibrated. A missed call notification popped up. It was from my mom. I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. According to my phone, she had just called me, but I hadn't heard it ring downstairs. I slowly scrolled through my call log. The last completed call was the one we'd already had. This one was marked as missed. I remember thinking that maybe my phone hadn't rung properly, or maybe I'd accidentally silenced it. Still, that didn't explain why I'd heard the ringtone upstairs. I stayed on the stairs for another minute, listening. Nothing. The house was silent again. I debated going upstairs to check, but something about the situation made me uncomfortable. I told myself I was being stupid and that there had to be a normal explanation. Even so, I didn't move. Eventually, I went back downstairs and sat on the couch. I plugged my phone into a portable charger instead of going upstairs for the real one. About 15 minutes later, my mom called again. This time, my phone rang normally, right there on the couch next to me. I answered and tried to casually mention what had happened. She immediately told me she hadn't tried to call me again earlier. She said the missed call must have been a mistake or a glitch. I didn't push the issue. I didn't want to sound paranoid. We talked for a bit, and then she said she was going to bed. After we hung up, I locked the front door again, checked the back door, and made sure all the lights downstairs were on. I avoided looking at the staircase as much as possible. Eventually, I decided to go to bed. I stood at the bottom of the stairs for a long time before forcing myself to go up. Every step creaked louder than usual. I kept expecting to hear something, movement, a door closing, anything. But the upstairs was quiet. I checked my parents' bedroom from the hallway. The door was exactly the way they'd left it earlier that day, closed, but not fully latched. I didn't open it. I went into my room, locked the door, and lay in bed with the light on. I didn't sleep well. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of a phone vibrating. At least, I thought that's what it was. It was faint, like the sound was coming from somewhere else in the house. I held my breath and listened. The vibration stopped. I checked my phone. No notifications. No missed calls. I didn't get out of bed. The next morning, everything felt normal again. Sunlight made the house feel harmless, and I started to convince myself that the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. Still, I decided to check something. I went into my parents' bedroom while they were gone. I checked the drawers, the bedside table, and under the bed. There were no phones, no old devices, no landline, no tablets. We don't even have a house phone. When my parents came back the next day, I asked them directly if they'd left any electronics behind. They said no. I told them what happened, and they laughed it off, saying it must have been a delayed ringtone or a glitch with my phone. I tried to accept that explanation, but after that weekend, something changed. I started noticing small things, nothing obvious, just things that made me uneasy. The doors upstairs felt warmer than they should have. The faint smell of someone else's shampoo in the hallway bathroom, when I knew no one had used it. A few weeks later, it happened again. I was home alone in the evening when my phone rang. This time, it wasn't my mom. It was my own number. I stared at the screen, confused, before answering. There was no sound on the other end, just faint static, and what sounded like breathing. I hung up immediately. When I checked the call log afterward, the call wasn't there. I moved out a few months later. To this day, my parents still live in that house. They've never experienced anything strange, but whenever I visit, I avoid going upstairs alone. And if my phone rings while I'm there, I always check to make sure it's not coming from somewhere else first. I'm not entirely sure why this experience bothered me as much as it did. Nothing violent happened, and I was never hurt. But it was one of the first times I felt truly unsafe inside a place that was supposed to be mine. This happened a few years ago when I was living alone in a small apartment. It was my first time having my own place, and while it wasn't anything special, I was proud of it. The building itself was old, the kind with narrow hallways, uneven floors, and doors that never quite lined up with their frames. Most of the time, I liked the quiet. The walls were thick, and I rarely heard my neighbors. During the day, the building felt almost empty. This happened on a Sunday afternoon. I remember that clearly because I wasn't in a hurry. Sundays were usually my reset days: laundry, cleaning, and doing nothing else. I had music playing softly while I sorted clothes in my bedroom. At some point, I stepped into the bedroom to grab a basket of laundry and closed the door behind me out of habit. That's important. I didn't slam it. I didn't lock it. I just closed it. A few minutes later, once I had what I needed, I reached for the handle to leave. It didn't turn. At first, I thought the door was just sticking. That happens sometimes in that apartment. I pulled the handle harder. Nothing. I tried turning it the other way. Still, nothing. That's when I noticed something that didn't make sense. The handle felt locked. My bedroom door didn't have a lock on the inside. There was no button, no switch, no latch. The lock was only on the outside, meant for privacy when someone wasn't home. I stood there for a second, staring at the door like it would explain itself. Then I laughed more out of nerves than anything and told myself it was just old hardware. I pulled harder. The door didn't budge. I checked my phone. No service issues. I had full signal. I called maintenance, straight to voicemail.
Hello, no one is available to take your call. Please leave a message after the tone.
It was a weekend. I tried texting a friend, joking about being stuck in my own bedroom. They didn't reply right away. That's when the situation stopped being funny. I tried the door again, harder this time. I shook the handle, pressed my shoulder into the frame, even kicked near the latch. Nothing worked. After about 10 minutes, I started feeling uneasy. I live alone, and suddenly realizing that I couldn't leave a room in my own apartment made the space feel smaller. I called maintenance again. Still nothing. I sat down on the edge of my bed, trying to calm myself down. I told myself it was temporary, that someone would eventually answer, or that the door would give. That's when I heard something outside the room. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, moving across the apartment floor. I froze. At first, I assumed it was a neighbor walking past in the hallway outside my apartment, But the sound was wrong. These footsteps were inside my unit. They stopped directly outside my bedroom door. I held my breath and listened. I called out, asking if anyone was there. No answer. A few seconds passed, and then I heard the sound of fingers brushing against the door. Not knocking, just touching. I stood up slowly, backing away from the door. My heart was pounding, and my mouth felt dry. I didn't know what to do or what to say. Then, very slowly, the door handle turned. The lock clicked. The door opened just enough for the latch to clear the frame. I stared at the opening, waiting to see someone on the other side. There was no one there. The hallway was empty. Every door in the apartment was exactly where it should have been. Nothing was out of place. No windows were open. The front door was still locked. I didn't step out right away. I stood there for a long time, listening for movement, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Eventually, I walked into the living room and sat down, still shaking. I left the apartment that evening and stayed with a friend. When I came back the next day, I tried the bedroom door again. It worked perfectly. Maintenance came later that week and told me the lock was old but functional. They couldn't find anything wrong with it. I stayed in that apartment for 3 more months. During that time, I never closed my bedroom door completely again. I slept with it open, even in winter. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear faint sounds in the apartment, footsteps, soft shifting noises. But every time I checked, nothing was there. When my lease ended, I moved out immediately. The last thing I did before leaving for good was test the bedroom door one more time. It locked from the outside. I've hesitated to send this story in because nothing about it sounds frightening on paper. There were no intruders, no threats, and no direct danger. But it was one of the few times in my life where I felt watched inside my own home, and that feeling never really went away. This happened a few years ago when I was living with a roommate in a small apartment. We had opposite work schedules, which meant I spent a lot of nights alone. She worked overnight shifts at a hospital, and I worked regular daytime hours. I was used to being by myself late at night. It never bothered me before. That night was a weekday. I remember because I had work the next morning and had told myself I would go to bed early. My roommate had already left for her shift around 9 p.m. She texted me when she arrived, just like she always did. After that, it was just me and the apartment. The place itself wasn't old or creepy. It was a fairly modern unit on the second floor of a quiet building. The walls were thin enough that you could hear neighbors during the day, but at night, everything went silent. Around midnight, I was still awake, sitting on the couch and watching TV. Nothing unusual, just background noise while I scrolled through my phone. Eventually, I felt tired enough to go to bed. I turned the TV off using the remote. The screen went black. I remember sitting there for a second, making sure it was actually off because sometimes the remote lagged. The TV stayed off. I stood up, locked the front door, checked the windows, and went into my bedroom. I locked my bedroom door out of habit. I've always done that, even when I'm not alone. I turned off the light and went to sleep. I don't know how long I was asleep before something woke me up. At first, I thought it was noise from outside. Then I realized it was coming from inside the apartment. Voices. Muffled, distant voices. I opened my eyes and lay still, listening. It took me a few seconds to realize where the sound was coming from. The living room. The TV was on. I checked the time on my phone. It was 2:17 a.m. I hadn't set any timers or alarms, and the TV had never turned on by itself before. I sat up slowly in bed, listening through the door. The volume was low, but I could hear people talking. It didn't sound like a show I recognized. There was no laugh track, no music, just calm, steady voices, like a news broadcast or a late-night talk show. I stayed in bed for a moment, trying to decide what to do. I considered getting up and turning it off, but something about the situation made me hesitate. The apartment felt different, quieter, heavier. I checked my phone and texted my roommate, asking if she'd come home early by any chance. She replied almost immediately, saying she was still at work and wouldn't be home until morning. That ruled out the only explanation that made sense. I listened again. The voices continued uninterrupted. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the tone was calm and conversational, like nothing was wrong. I pressed my ear closer to the door. That's when I noticed something else. The volume wasn't changing. No commercials. No transitions. Just continuous talking. I stood up and quietly unlocked my bedroom door. I didn't turn on the light. I just cracked the door open enough to see into the hallway. The living room was dark, except for the glow of the TV screen. The light flickered softly against the walls. I stayed there for a long time, watching from the hallway. I didn't move any closer. Eventually, I pulled the door shut again and locked it. I don't know why, but that felt safer than confronting whatever was happening. The voices continued for a while longer. Then they stopped. The TV didn't turn off. The screen just changed. I could hear static now. A low, steady hiss. That was worse, somehow. I sat on my bed, staring at the door, trying not to imagine someone sitting on the couch, watching the static. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Around 6 a.m., I heard the front door unlock. My roommate came home, tired and half asleep. I opened my bedroom door and asked her if she'd turned the TV on before she left. She said no. We walked into the living room together. The TV was off. The remote was still on the coffee table where I'd left it. When we turned the TV on to check the settings, it wasn't tuned to any channel. It wasn't connected to cable input at all. Just static. We both tried to laugh it off, saying it must have been a glitch or a power surge. But after that night, strange things kept happening. Nothing dramatic, just small things. The TV would sometimes turn on to static when no one was in the room. It would turn off again before we could check it. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear the faint click of the power button sound from the living room. Once, I woke up to the TV volume increasing on its own. We unplugged it at night after that. Even then, there were moments when I'd wake up and feel like the apartment wasn't empty, like something was happening just outside my bedroom door. Eventually, my roommate moved out, and I followed a few months later. The TV stayed behind. I bought a new one for my next place. To this day, I don't fall asleep with the TV on, and if I ever hear voices coming from another room, after I've turned everything off, I don't investigate anymore. I just wait for the morning. I've told this story a few times, and every time I do, people try to explain it away. They say I must have been mistaken, or that I remembered it wrong. I've tried to accept those explanations, but there are details that never quite fit, no matter how much time passes. This happened when I was still living at home with my family. I was in my late teens, old enough to stay home alone without it being a big deal. We lived in a 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing about it was unusual, and nothing like this had ever happened before. One evening, my parents and siblings decided to go out to dinner. I stayed behind because I wasn't feeling well. I remember standing in the hallway while they were getting ready, telling them I'd be fine, and that I'd probably just lie down and watch something. Before they left, my mom asked one last time if I was sure I didn't want to come. I told her no, and she reminded me to lock the door behind them. I watched them walk out to the car. I heard the engine start. I waited until they pulled away. Then I locked the front door. The house felt unusually quiet after that, the way it always does when you suddenly realize you're alone. I went into the living room and sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone. I wasn't doing anything important, just trying to distract myself. About 30 minutes passed, maybe a little more. That's when I heard the shower turn on. At first, I didn't react. My brain immediately tried to explain it away. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was the pipes shifting or water moving somewhere else in the house. But then I heard it clearly, the rush of water hitting the tub. It was coming from upstairs. I sat up and muted whatever I was watching. The sound didn't stop. In fact, it got louder, like someone had turned the water pressure up. I stared toward the staircase, trying to make sense of it. No one else was supposed to be home. I knew that. I'd watched them leave. I called out, asking if anyone was there. No answer. The water kept running. I stood up slowly and walked to the bottom of the stairs. From there, the sound was unmistakable. Someone was using the upstairs bathroom. I remember feeling confused more than scared at first. I honestly wondered if my family had come back early and I just hadn't heard the door. I called out again, louder this time. Still no response. I took one step up the stairs, then stopped. I heard movement, not just the water movement. The soft sound of someone shifting their weight, maybe stepping on the bath mat. Then I heard the shower curtain slide. That was when fear finally set in. I didn't go any farther. I stayed right where I was, gripping the banister, listening. My heart was pounding, and my mouth felt dry. I tried to call my mom, but she didn't answer. I tried my dad next. Straight to voicemail. The water shut off. The sudden silence was worse. I stood there, frozen, listening as hard as I could. A few seconds passed, and then I heard drawers opening. The bathroom drawers. The sound was unmistakable, wood sliding against wood. Then footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, moving across the bathroom floor. I whispered, asking who was there. No answer. The bathroom door closed. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed my keys and ran out the front door, locking it behind me without thinking. I stood on the porch, shaking, staring at the door like I expected it to open at any second. I didn't go back inside. I waited outside until my family came home. When they finally pulled into the driveway, I rushed over to them, talking too fast, trying to explain what had happened. At first, they thought I was joking. Then they saw how shaken I was. We went inside together. The house looked normal. The bathroom upstairs was dry. The shower curtain was pushed back the way we usually left it. No towels were missing. Nothing looked disturbed. The front door was still locked, but the mirror in the bathroom was fogged. Steam was still clinging to the glass, slowly fading. And in the center of the mirror was a single handprint. It wasn't mine. I know that because my hand was smaller, and because the print was too high up. No one had an explanation for it. My parents tried to reassure me, saying maybe someone had broken in and left before I noticed. But nothing was missing. No windows were open. No locks were damaged. After that night, I never stayed home alone in that house again. Even now, years later, I can't hear running water in an empty house without feeling uneasy. And sometimes, when the bathroom mirror fogs up after a shower, I still check it carefully before wiping it clean, just in case there's a handprint that doesn't belong to me.